Hey everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be diving into the life of a figure who's really become almost mythical.
Yeah,
Che Guevara.
absolutely.
And our source material today is going to be excerpts from his Wikipedia page,
Okay.
which spans, his entire life, really,
Wow.
from, growing up in Argentina to his role in the Cuban Revolution and
Yeah.
all the things that happened after that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think most people just know that one image,
Yeah.
the beret and the steely gaze, but there's so much more to Che's story than that.
That's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
I love it.
We're going to go beyond that, poster boy image of rebellion
Yeah.
and really discover this complex man behind it.
Yeah, his story is full of twists and turns, you know.
Yeah.
Medicine motorcycles,
Yeah.
guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It really is.
Yeah,
It challenges those simple narratives that we often hear about him.
for sure.
So let's start at the beginning with Ernesto Che Guevara's early life. Born in 1928 in Argentina,
Mm-hmm.
but here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
Unlike many revolutionaries, he wasn't born into poverty.
Yeah, you're right. His family was actually quite well off.
Yeah.
A child of privilege.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, he had this intensity,
Early.
battling asthma,
Yeah.
while also excelling in sports like rugby.
Huh?
He even got the nickname Fuser
Mhm.
for his aggressive playing style.
So, like, was there always a hint of the revolutionary he'd become even back then?
Right. I mean, maybe it was that competitive spirit that later found its outlet in fighting for a cause.
Interesting.
And speaking of finding his cause, we have to talk about those motorcycle journeys
Oh, yeah, those were huge.
across South America.
Yeah, you can actually trace those in his book, The Motorcycle Diaries,
Yes.
which became a bestseller
Huge.
and even a movie.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
They offered him this firsthand look at the poverty and injustice
Oh, yeah.
that so many people and that contrast between his own comfortable upbringing and the suffering he witnessed it really shook him.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Like, the world opened up to him, and he couldn't ignore these inequalities anymore.
Yeah, and one encounter in particular really stayed with him.
Oh, yeah?
He met this persecuted communist couple in the Atacama Desert.
Wow,
They were really struggling to survive.
that's tough.
It was. And that moment, combined with everything else he saw, it really ignited this fire in him.
I bet.
It made him question the whole system,
Right.
especially the role of corporations like the United Fruit Company,
Oh, yeah.
which held so much power in the region.
It's like those journeys planted the seeds of revolution in his heart.
Totally. And those seeds began to sprout when he got to Guatemala
Okay.
under the presidency of Jacobo Arbenz.
Interesting.
Now, Arbenz was really trying to enact some social and land reforms.
Right?
And you can imagine that didn't sit well with powerful entities like the United Fruit Company.
Oh, for sure.
And it's in Guatemala that Ernesto picks up his famous nickname,
Oh, that's right.
Che.
Yeah.
It's just like a common Argentinian term.
Oh, okay.
It's like saying buddy or pal.
Like, hey, Che, what's up?
Yeah, exactly.
I like it.
But it's interesting how this ordinary word became so loaded with meaning.
Yeah,
It's almost like this, badge of revolutionary identity.
totally.
And it's also in Guatemala that Che witnesses the really brutal consequences of U.S. intervention.
Oh, wow.
So the CIA-backed overthrow of Arbenz, which was largely orchestrated to protect those interests of the United Fruit Company,
Yeah.
it left a deep mark on him.
I can only imagine. Can you imagine seeing a democratically elected leader who's trying to help his people
Yeah,
get toppled by a foreign power?
yeah,
I mean, that had to solidify his anti-imperialist stance
for sure.
and his belief that sometimes peaceful change just isn't possible.
Right, and so disillusioned but determined, Che ends up in Mexico City.
Okay.
And he's juggling all these different jobs at doctor, photographer, lecturer.
Handy, busy guy.
But those core beliefs are still burning bright.
Yeah.
And then comes this truly pivotal moment.
Oh, yeah.
He meets Fidel and Raul Castro.
Wow. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
I know.
Fidel was already planning his revolution
Yeah.
against Batista's regime in Cuba.
It's almost like destiny, right?
Yeah.
This chance meeting set the stage for one of history's most famous revolutionary partnerships.
And it's fascinating because they were such different personalities.
Yeah.
You've got Fidel, the charismatic leader, and then Che, the intellectual, the strategist.
Yeah, it's a potent combination for sure.
Yeah.
But despite their differences, they were united by this passion for social justice and their belief that revolution was the only way to achieve it.
Powerful stuff.
So Che joins Fidel's 26th of July movement,
Okay.
named after their earlier attempt to overthrow Batista.
Right.
And soon enough, they're training in the Mexican countryside.
Wow.
It's this small group of rebels getting ready to take on a dictator.
That's amazing.
Can you picture it?
I'm trying.
This Argentinian doctor turned guerrilla fighter learning the art of war alongside Fidel Castro.
That's a movie.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, Che's military skills weren't just theoretical.
Okay.
The Battle of Santa Clara was his chance to put those skills to the test, and boy, did he deliver.
He did.
Oh yeah, it was a strategic masterpiece. He led his column to capture the city, essentially crippling Batista's regime.
So this was a turning point.
Huge turning point.
Wow.
This victory paved the way for the rebels' final push toward Havana.
Wow. So what happened?
Well, Batista, realizing the game was up, he fled Cuba on New Year's Day, 1959.
Wow.
Just a few days later, Fidel Castro marched triumphantly into Havana, marking the end of the Cuban Revolution.
And Che, the doctor who'd crossed continents and embraced armed struggle, was right there with him.
He was.
But the victory was just the beginning.
Yeah.
With a new Cuba on the horizon, Che's role was about to get even more complex.
Definitely stay tuned for more on that after the break.
Welcome back, you guys. So we left off with the Cuban Revolution having just triumphed Batista out and a new era dawning for Cuba.
It's really fascinating to think about what those early days must have felt like.
Right.
So much hope, so much potential, but also these immense challenges of actually building a new nation.
Totally. And Che Guevara, with his, unwavering commitment to the cause, found himself right at the center of it all.
Oh, yeah.
He took on a really powerful role becoming commander of La Cabaña prison.
Oh, okay.
But this is where things get really complex.
In what way?
So he was tasked with overseeing these revolutionary tribunals,
Oh, wow.
which were essentially courts that decided the fate of those accused of crimes under Batista.
I see.
And these tribunals were often really swift, with some accounts claiming a lack of due process.
Oh, wow.
Hundreds were executed under Che's watch.
Really?
Yeah, and it's something that's been debated fiercely ever since.
I can imagine. So how do we understand these actions? Well, it's important to remember that Cuba was in this really tumultuous state at the time.
Right.
The revolution was still fragile. The threat of counter-revolution was very real.
Yeah.
And Che believed that those who had committed atrocities under Batista needed to be held accountable.
He saw it as a form of revolutionary justice.
Exactly. He even called it a necessity for the people of Cuba.
But even in that context, you can see how those actions raise serious questions
Oh, absolutely.
about the use of violence
Yeah.
and the balance of power.
Totally.
It really highlights this idea that revolutions, even those fought for noble ideals, can have this very dark side.
For sure, it's a stark reminder that revolutionary change often comes at a steep price.
Yeah, you're right.
But Che's influence in Cuba wasn't limited to La Cabaña.
Okay, where else did it extend?
He was really deeply involved in shaping the country's new economic and social landscape.
Interesting. So what were his ideas?
Well, he had this vision of a more egalitarian society, one free from the exploitation that he saw as inherent in capitalism.
Right.
So he really dove headfirst into reshaping Cuba's economy.
In what way?
He became the Minister of Industries,
Wow.
which put him in charge of this huge undertaking, nationalizing industries, implementing central planning, and trying to really industrialize the country rapidly.
That sounds like he was trying to move quickly.
Yeah, he believed that Cuba could bypass those traditional stages of development
Interesting.
and sort of leapfrog into a socialist utopia.
That's a bold vision.
It really was. And his ideas went beyond just the economic systems, He talked about creating the new man.
The new man.
Yeah, it was this idea of a selfless citizen dedicated to the collective good,
Yeah.
driven by moral incentives rather than material wealth.
So think about how radical that is.
It is.
A society built on values rather than individual gain.
Right. It's this utopian vision that resonates with a lot of people,
For sure.
but also poses these huge practical challenges.
Yeah, how do you even begin to implement something like that?
Exactly. And one of Che's biggest successes during this period was his focus on education and literacy.
Okay, I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah, so he launched this Year of Education campaign in 1961.
Year of education.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And they sent all these volunteers out to teach literacy in rural areas.
Wow. So it was like a big mobilization effort
It really was.
to increase literacy rates.
Exactly. And it led to a significant increase in literacy across Cuba.
That's awesome.
It really shows, how dedicated he was to empowering people through education,
Yeah.
which was a key part of his revolutionary vision.
It's interesting, though, because while Che had these lofty ideals, his economic policies weren't always smooth sailing.
No, they weren't.
Yeah.
Pushing for rapid industrialization wasn't easy in a country with a largely agricultural economy.
Right.
And his focus on moral incentives over material ones sparked a lot of debates among economists.
Yeah.
Some questioned if his approach was actually practical in the long run.
Right, because it's this tension between idealism and pragmatism.
Yeah.
That often plays out in revolutions.
Totally.
How do you balance these grand visions with the day-to-day realities
Right.
of building a functioning economy?
Yeah. It's a question that plagued a lot of revolutionary movements.
For sure. And for Che, this tension would eventually contribute to his decision to leave Cuba.
Yeah, but before we get to that, we need to talk about some major international events that shaped his thinking.
Oh, like what?
Well, like the Bay of Pigs invasion, for example.
Oh, right, where the U.S. tried to use Cuban exiles to overthrow Castro's government.
Exactly, in 1961.
Wow, that must have been huge for Che.
It was, even though he wasn't directly involved in the fighting, he had been really instrumental in preparing the militia for an attack like that.
So seeing the Cuban people resist this foreign intervention must have been powerful.
Extremely. It was a validation of the revolution's strength.
Yeah, and it probably deepened his distrust of the U.S.
Absolutely solidified those anti-imperialist views.
Yeah.
It was just another piece of evidence for him that the U.S. was actively working to suppress socialist movements in Latin America.
And then, of course, there's the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962.
Oh, yeah. Talk about a high-stakes moment in the Cold War.
The world held its breath as the U.S. and the Soviet Union went head-to-head over those Soviet missiles in Cuba.
And Che was right in the middle of it.
He was.
Oh, yeah, he was a key figure in bringing those missiles to Cuba.
Wow.
He saw them as a necessary deterrent against another U.S. invasion.
So he was willing to risk nuclear war to protect the revolution.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah, it is.
And when Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, agreed to remove the missiles without even consulting, Castro Che was furious.
Oh, wow.
He saw it as this, total betrayal, a concession to U.S. imperialism.
This incident must have really solidified his belief that Cuba needed to chart its own course.
It did, independent of both the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Wow. So he's becoming increasingly critical of the Soviet model of socialism then.
He saw it as too bureaucratic and too willing to compromise with capitalist powers.
So he wanted something much more radical, a complete break from the capitalist world.
Exactly. And this disillusionment would play a big role in his decision to leave Cuba and continue his revolutionary journey elsewhere.
Wow. Okay, so before we follow Che down that path, though, there's another important piece of the puzzle that we need to explore.
Okay.
Remember the great debate we mentioned earlier?
Yes.
This clash of ideas about Cuba's economic future. It sheds more light on Che's evolving revolutionary thought.
It does. So Che, ever the idealist, believed they could move directly to a communist society,
Okay.
bypassing those transitional phases.
Right. So he argued that they could achieve this through moral incentives, education, and a radical departure from capitalist models.
Yeah, but other economists, even within the government, advocated for a more gradual approach.
Okay.
A mixed economy that prioritized industries like sugar production to generate, much needed revenue.
So it shows how complex those early years of the revolution were,
Oh, yeah.
with different factions grappling with the best way to actually build a new Cuba.
Totally. And for Che, this debate really underlined the limitations he saw in staying put.
He yearned for a purer form of revolution.
Yeah.
One that wouldn't be constrained by the realities of governing a nation.
Right. And that yearning would lead him to leave Cuba and set his sights on a new revolutionary horizon.
Wow. So where did he go next?
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Che Guevara, you guys. So when we left off, Che was becoming increasingly disillusioned with the path that Cuba was taking.
Right. He had this burning desire for a more radical kind of revolution.
One that extended beyond just the island's shores.
It's kind of hard to imagine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Here he's one of the architects of this Cuban Revolution,
Right.
but he felt compelled to leave it all behind.
Yeah, he was driven by this really deep belief that the struggle against imperialism, it was a global one.
Yeah, he saw Cuba as just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. So in 1965, he embarks on this secret mission to the Congo,
The Congo, wow.
which was a nation in the throes of this really complicated civil war at the time. And get this, he went under the alias Ramon Benitez.
Ramon Benitez.
Yeah, it's like a detail that almost adds to the mystique, you know?
It really does.
But you can see how much he believed in the power of armed struggle.
Right.
And like taking the fight directly to the places that he saw as oppressed.
He felt that Africa, with its history of colonial exploitation, was ripe for revolution.
He did.
Wow.
He wanted to help ignite this continent-wide uprising, uniting all these different rebel groups under a socialist banner.
I mean, that's a bold vision.
Incredibly bold.
Almost overwhelming in scope.
It really is, and he even brought along this group of Afro-Cuban soldiers to help train those Congolese fighters in guerrilla warfare.
So it shows how deeply he believed in that Cuban model.
Totally.
In exporting that revolutionary spirit.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the Congo mission ended up being a major setback for Che.
Really? What happened?
Well, he faced a lot of obstacles, conflicts within the rebel groups themselves. A lack of support from the local population, a really poorly equipped and just disorganized fighting force.
Oh, that's tough.
It was. And on top of all of that, his own health was deteriorating.
Oh, no.
Yeah, those harsh jungle conditions, they really aggravated his asthma.
That makes sense.
So it's kind of a reminder that even the most skilled guerrilla leader can't overcome every challenge, right?
Right. Those external factors, local realities all play a role.
Totally. And the Congo was this harsh lesson for Che.
Yeah.
He had to admit defeat and flee after only 7 months.
Wow.
But his revolutionary spirit, it wasn't broken.
Okay.
After a period of hiding and reflection, he sets his sights on a new target.
Where to Bolivia?
Bolivia.
Yeah.
So this time he aims to create this revolutionary base in the Bolivian mountains.
Okay.
Hoping to spark this movement that would then spread throughout Latin America.
I mean, think about the sheer audacity of that.
It's amazing.
He was essentially trying to take on this entire, U.S.-backed establishment.
He really saw Latin America as this next major battleground in the fight against imperialism.
Wow.
Sadly, though, the Bolivian campaign proved to be even more disastrous than the Congo.
Really? How so?
Well, again, he encountered a lack of support from the local population.
Yeah.
Many of whom were suspicious of his foreign origins and his ideology.
That makes sense.
And even the Bolivian Communist Party refused to help.
Wow.
They aligned themselves with the more cautious approach of the Soviet Union.
Oh, wow.
And of course, the U.S. was actively working against him.
Right.
They sent CIA operatives and military advisors to help the Bolivian army hunt him down.
So it was a losing battle from the start.
It really was. His small band of guerrillas was constantly on the move.
Yeah.
Facing shortages of everything, food, medicine, supplies.
It's rough.
And to make matters worse, Che's health continued to decline.
Oh, no.
The asthma was relentless, and it made it incredibly difficult to lead in those harsh mountain conditions.
You can only imagine how physically and mentally draining that must have been.
Oh, absolutely. But despite all of that, he kept fighting.
Wow.
Driven by that unwavering commitment to his ideals.
It's amazing.
But sadly, in October of 1967, his luck ran out.
Oh, no, what happened?
He was wounded in a firefight and captured by Bolivian special forces.
Oh, no.
Trained and equipped by the U.S.
So that was the end of the line for the legendary revolutionary.
It was his captors acting on orders from the Bolivian government and with the approval of the CIA executed Che Guevara on October 9th, 1967.
Wow.
He was only 39 years old.
His death must have sent shockwaves through revolutionary movements all over the world.
It really cemented his status as this martyr for some and a cautionary tale for others.
And in a way, even in death, his image became even more powerful.
It did that iconic photograph by Alberto Corda, the one with the beret, the intense gaze.
I know the one.
It turned him into this global symbol of rebellion,
right,
resistance, and anti-establishment sentiment.
Yeah, and his writings, especially guerrilla warfare and his diaries, became so influential.
They fueled movements for social change and national liberation all over the world.
Wow.
From Latin America to Africa and beyond.
But his legacy remains complex and contested to this day.
Oh, absolutely. He's still this lightning rod for debate,
Yeah, inspiring both admiration and criticism.
Exactly. So some people see him as this ultimate idealist.
Right.
A man who sacrificed everything for his beliefs.
A champion of the oppressed, a fearless fighter against injustice.
But others criticize his methods, his embrace of violence,
Yeah.
and his role in Cuba's post-revolution tribunals.
Right. They argue that his focus on armed struggle ultimately failed to create lasting change.
His life and death really force us to confront some uncomfortable truths
For sure.
about the complexities of revolution, the
Yeah.
human cost of conflict,
Hmm.
and just the seductive power of ideology.
Well, it's been quite a journey exploring the life of Che Guevara.
It really has.
So much to unpack. So
Yeah,
many layers to his story.
absolutely. So where do you stand on the legacy of this revolutionary figure? It's tough, because he was a man who lived and died by his convictions, a man who challenged the world order and dared to imagine a different future.
Right.
Whether you see him as a hero, a villain, or something in between,
Yeah.
there's just no denying the profound impact that he had on history.
This has been the Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.
Good.
Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.